And a very warm welcome to everyone on the line from Bellatrix. As I mentioned, my name is Charles Green. I'm part of the marketing team here at Bellatrix. And today is really a special event for us because we're delighted to be announcing a partnership together with WSO2, where we will be offering dedicated services for customers interested in taking advantage of the power and simplicity of WSO2's platform. We're going to be tweeting during the course of today's webinar, so please follow us using the hashtag Digital Services 2015, and you can also tweet us your questions as well. So today's session is really about sharing our knowledge, so we'll be absolutely delighted to take questions from you during the course of today's webinar. Or you can also just type your questions into the chat onto the bottom right-hand side of the GoToMeeting panel. So without further ado, I want to hand over to Mifam Karim of WSO2 to explain to everyone in more detail about the company and the middleware platform specifically.
Thank you, Charles. So this is a joint webinar by Bellatrix and WSO2, and I'm here to introduce the WSO2 side of it, talk about the company, and then talk about what the platform offers. WSO2 was a company formed in 2005. We focus on enterprise middleware, and we are an open platform for building enterprise middleware solutions on top of a middleware stack. The company was founded by Dr. Sanjeev Veeravarna and Paul Fremantle back in 2005, mostly based out of Sri Lanka and headquartered out of US. We now have offices in Colombo, Sri Lanka, London, Bloomington, and Mountain View in US. And we have an office in Brazil as well, and some upcoming offices as well. The unique aspect of WSO2 is that we are a 100% open source company. We have an open source business model as well as an open source software development stack. So when it comes to the open source business model, we have a unique rotational model. If you can look at the diagram on your left-hand side, we basically have the engineering team that builds the core set of products on top of the Carbon platform, basically rotating into various roles. So you've got the same engineers who build the products supporting you in a pre-sales role or supporting you when it comes to the 24/7 support. Let me talk about the WSO2 middleware platform. This diagram basically shows you the Carbon platform, basically all of the components built on top of a single code base. So this diagram looks complicated, but it's quite a unique platform. So WSO2 is the only company to build the entire middleware platform. There's no acquired bits here. So everything's built from scratch. It's built on top of a single code base, and that means a lot when it comes to integration, both from a technical perspective and a business perspective. All of these components are 100% open source. They are 100% lean, and they're quite flexible. So you can basically use these various components as building blocks to build your end solution. So regardless of your scenario that you're looking at, if you're looking at this integration, trying to integrate legacy systems, looking at API management, where you expose APIs to third parties and control them, have managed APIs, an identity and entitlement management system, or an identity server bus, a governance solution for your overall organization, a private platform as a service, mobile device management or connected device management, and big data analytics. Basically, the WSO2 platform provides you an end-to-end set of components which you can use to build your end solution. So we've got a lot of case studies out there where people and companies have basically used our products to build solutions, including a lot of e-government case studies. And Bellatrix today is basically going to talk about one of those scenarios and go into detail on how to build a connected business. So Ruben, over to you.
Well, firstly, thanks, Mifam. Just a very brief overview then to Bellatrix before we get into the case study. Bellatrix is a dedicated company in the high-quality, innovative software product development industry. You can see here on the slide we have the three founders of the company, Luis Robio, Alex, and Federico Robio, and a brief history of the company as well. We have over 10 years of experience in various agile methodologies in both development and testing. Everyone here at Bellatrix is trained in agile, and more than 30% of employees are certified Scrum Masters. And our expertise really lies in tailoring your ideas into world-class software products. We have development centers in Mendoza and Buenos Aires in Argentina, as well as Lima, Peru. We also have a local presence in the US, in New York, Silicon Valley, and Florida. But then moving on, that's really enough about us, I think, for now. And as mentioned, we're delighted to be announcing this partnership with WSO2 in today's webinar. So if we're looking on the next slide, you can see here the agenda for the rest of the session. So we're going to be talking about some of the challenges with forming a connected business. We're going to be giving you a step-by-step implementation guide to this. And then finally, we're going to be giving you a deep dive into a government and public sector organization to see how they've used open source middleware to transform the services they provide to their constituents. So with that, I want to hand over to Ruben.
Thank you, Charles, and thank you everyone for joining this session. So, as was mentioned, today we'll be talking about a connected business and how WSO2 can help that to be in a good manner. So, as every one of you may know, enterprises today in each of sectors of the industry needs to step away from their traditional ways of engaging with all their customers and suppliers to ensure a better experience for these parties when they interact with the system via integration. So in this webinar, we'll talk specifically how organizations are claiming on having a good integration to improve their processes. So through connected business, the value proposition of an enterprise increases the focus of that business in their area of expertise and allows them to outsource all other tasks through connected services. This enables the enterprise to improve their relationship with the customers and partners, as mentioned, and it makes the enterprise more agile and drives new revenue opportunities. Main concern of a connected business is to make the user experience more productive and effective. So for that, first of all, these organizations have to detect the key challenges that they have to move to be a connected business. First of the challenges is the complex business requirements that they handle. This is mostly because there is a bigger problem as a larger portion of the business would need to be covered, and requirements could change really quick, and as soon you progress with meeting these requirements and depending of the different verticals needs to be connected. So second challenge, and in current time, as we know, there are much quicker release cycles, with release cycles probably taking place either weekly or monthly compared with yearly release cycles about 5-10 years ago with the waterfall development cycle. Third challenge is that most users of these institutions' systems won't actually be seeing the middleware and shouldn't be seeing it. It should be transparent. What they do see at the end are applications like web apps, web services, and mobile applications as well. And fourth challenge that we detect in common for these companies is that tech-oriented people are now looking for ways to go beyond middleware in order to achieve greater things and show better results because of the current business requirements. Next, we'll see how to become a connected business, how at least what the starting point is. So at this graph, we are seeing the business service platform that was created by identifying a common set of requirements in organizations, generally speaking, in different verticals. So this concept was created 3 or 4 years ago by WSO2 based on solution architectures implemented through repeated use of this pattern based on the applications and services of the different customers' systems. Since this pattern was created, things have changed a lot. Now developers want to go beyond the bounds of the traditional middleware. The big three, let's say that it's mobile, social, and cloud. And they're talking about that frequently right now. key ingredient for building an ecosystem for your connected business is the API. Nevertheless, big data, dev operations, and open source are really considered on this. Due to all this influence, the initial pattern that was identified with this business service platform has changed, and a related pattern could be resolving more problems that had been identified. These patterns now refer as the connected business itself. The journey of how you should build a connected institution with this pattern is part of a technical or not technical. So there are many stages that we'll be moving across during this webinar that your system needs to go through in order to make your organizations to be connected. So let's move to the step-by-step implementation. I'll start, well, the first stage is the requirement stage. In this stage, what we do is to identify the requirements of the organization and what needs to be done on the middleware system. In a general institution with the scope of connecting several lines of business, it's really quite important to coordinate about the best use cases to be added on the ecosystem that we are talking about. Take into consideration specific needs, but more importantly, to have a clear general scope of the final implementation. Sometimes each vertical will think of not just their needs, but needs to think on the general scope as well. It is very important to not directly take the requirements to build your solution. You also need to look at the current applications and systems and identify the delta, and then once you identify that delta, the requirements that you need to build as a new connected system. Then next step is to determine what's the technical approach. Yeah, let's say it's architecture. So this during this phase, you have to carefully analyze the business requirements that right now are called as the business architecture. Thereafter, you need to identify what business patterns need to be implemented for the solution. You have to build a solution architecture involving the creation of a level 0 and level 1 architecture, where level 0 is an architecture that is vendor neutral, meaning that no products are mapped to the solution itself. So you basically build a conceptual architecture with all the necessary layers and components for that particular solution. So to get or to move to the level 1 architecture, then you need to map the suitable products to the level 0 architecture. In this case, of course, WSO2 products that fits on each section of the architecture. Through these, you can identify what needs to be purchased and what can be reused in your current infrastructure. So as next step, you will need to build the application architecture, and this is before you identify integration requirements, APIs, and data modules to be included. Then the final step on this implementation is to figure out how everything will run, and this is called the runtime architecture. You have to look at your current system loads as well as the load of your project for the new system, and then perform a capacity planning to identify the number of runtimes you require to cater that load. Thereafter, you have to look at how it's going to be deployed before implementation. And the very important part of this is that this approach can be applied to any business domain. So here you can see a bit of mess that it's showing how a huge enterprise looks like with all the models and interrelationships. So this is a concept that most customers look at and agree with that. So the problem is that everything works well, but nobody knows how they are connected with each other and how changing something in their enterprise will impact the rest of the system. Everything is connected in a very, very complex manner and needs to be cleaned up in order to create a solution. So now, well, I'll give the introduction to Enzo, that it will be showing some other steps of the implementation. So Enzo, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Ruben.
Welcome.
So the basic component for your architecture will be services. And you need to define a services layer. You have to got it defined. So you can use the existing services regardless of the technology and the mechanism used. You need to be, you can add an adapter layer if you need it. You can use ESB for that. And you can also expose existing data as services using the data services server. But the important part is that every operation of the organizations needs to be exposed as services. Then you will need a registry or repository when you can expose the services. You can advertise them there. So you can use governance registry for that. And the next step will be about identity and access control. So you have to have the security in place. So all the internal user stores need to be linked. You will have different ones, and you have to have policies. So you can use WSO2 identity server for that, and you can also expose security-related APIs and hide the complexity of the different user storage and everything about that. And the next step is about connectivity. You will have connectivity inside your organization and outside your organization, and you can use Enterprise Service Bus as the connectivity layer in that case. You can connect every component of the system, and we also provide you with the management and governance environment that will allow your organization to keep the connectivity. But internally, it's not enough. You have to expose your services to the outside. You can have proprietary endpoints, so you have some specific connectors to do it in the WSO2 ESB. And to expose your services, you will have the API manager, and that's about the APIs. When you talk about services inside your company, when you need to expose them to the outside, you will talk about APIs. And the API manager server will allow you to do that. But you will also need monitoring, analytics, and audits on your services. So you can connect the Business Activity Monitor, or BAM, to your existing API manager or ESB in order to monitor and do analysis on the current situation and in the future state. But in some cases, you need some kind of complex event processing in real time. So the WSO2 complex event processor will allow you to do it. This is about the event-driven architecture pattern. It's the traditional publish and subscribe pattern when you publish events rather than performing a request response. So this pattern will allow you to do many architectures to many different solutions. And the final step is about workflows, rules, and publish subscriber. So it's about that you will have different requirements such as workflows, rules, and implementation patterns like publish and subscribe. So the business process server can be used in the case of complex workflows. You also might have different business rules that you need to reuse and store in a common place, and the business rule server can be used for this function. WSO2 message broker also can implement publish subscribe by using different supports such as JMS, AMQP, and HTTP, among other protocols. So a lot of developers these days are thinking of what they can do to do beyond the middleware stack. If you want to move your connected business to a cloud environment, WSO2 has a cloud stack. You can make use of this stack to create and deploy applications in a cloud-native environment. You can also use the WSO2 App Factory to manage your application's lifecycle. It includes building, managing, deploying, and returning apps. What's unique about the WSO2 stack is that even if the system is moved from an on-premises solution to a cloud solution, the same programming model, solution, architecture, and deployable artifacts will be used. Through that, you can get a cloud-based deployment as well as a cloud-native application that you can dynamically scale, enable billing and metering, etc., just by reusing what you will on your on-premises deployment. You need to bring the functionality of the legacy IT to the new IT. You can do this by placing an API management layer between these two environments. If your projects deal with more than a couple of developers, you can use WSO2 App Factory as a solution to manage the ALM. If you have a smaller project, you can consider dealing with the traditional application lifecycle management methods using different technologies, such as version controlling continuous build system. You can then build a repository underneath to collect and process the data as illustrated in the figure. To build a connected business architecture and use the products, you should have a proper plan with a clear structure. Here's a snapshot of the steps required to becoming a connected business. Convert the business functionality to services, expose them as APIs, build a community internally and externally, create new products and services, collect data, bring governance and security, improve incrementally. In order to achieve these steps, changes need to be made. Without change, you cannot achieve your goal of becoming a connected business. There will be technical tweaks that include hardware changes and program and system changes that can be seen as the easy part. The more challenging change will be the human and political changes that will occur in your business.
Okay, thank you, Enzo. So after the overview, we had a use case that's a real use case that you can find there in the WSO2.com website, and it's based on the implementation into a government institution from the US. And this system, this ecosystem is called the Enterprise Service Platform. But first of all, well, let's mention a little bit what the challenges of this kind of government institutions are experiencing in general, and what are the specific challenges that these government institutions had prior to implement the system using WSO2 middleware. So first key challenge was the big, and it is the big amount of state agencies that includes disorganization and how get that interconnected. They also have to handle huge budget on maintaining their systems internally first. So because of that, also they started to think of a new solution. They have a lot of employees, and they need to have a good identity system to have all of them to interact into the organization. And the last challenge they had that triggered to use this solution was something related to base platform factors and that is that they were having a big amount of services instances, public servers, and millions of users. So my objective to these organizations was to make every service available for each member of the community, anywhere and anytime. So what they acquired, implemented this middleware, was to have some new core capabilities, like including a new payment processing system, digital signatures, and workflows, and also having their users to use single sign-on as well. They handle security risks and monitoring in a better way, mostly related with single sign-on and social media logins, like through Facebook or Google+. Another thing they achieved was to have a good data sharing, having all of the APIs needed and exposed, not only for the internal employees, but also for external users of the institution services. Also, they added business intelligence and some analytics for the key players to make decisions. And finally, what they also achieved was the high agility, having high availability and continuity of all of their processes through the ecosystem, and having the chance to easily update and include new applications into the middleware. Something that is a key aspect, as Enzo mentioned, was the company politics and people on that company. So training was a key aspect there to make each employee and consumer to realize about how the integration works and the availability of their systems on the new architecture and ecosystem. So it is really important to train about the strategy that was followed. In this case, they trained really hard to get everyone to understand that, and also to make it a cultural change into the organization and expose all of that to the shared service that this platform provides. So that is the case of this implementation on the government institution that we are talking about. So we'll move to questions now.
Excellent, thank you, Ruben. And just to remind everyone on the line today that if you want to ask a question, you can tweet us a question using the hashtag #DigitalServices2015, or simply just type into the chat box on the GoToMeeting software. We have one question here coming from why a company needs to become more of a connected business. What is really the motivation behind that, and why should companies really be making these investments to become what we call a connected business?
I can answer that. One part of the presentation was mentioned, and the key objective of having, or why an organization needs to be connected, is to have more presence through their users and make it open to the to more users in a proper manner. Talking about commercial organizations, probably to win different markets worldwide, that's another reason of why this kind of organization was to be more connected and allianced. I don't know, Fine, if you have something else.
Yes, so connected business also enables, like you mentioned, newer business models. Right? So for example, when you talk about certain verticals, like a connected government, so we are now moving away from the traditional B2B models and going into the B2C models and so on and so forth. So digital enablement, engaging citizens, having like a citizen-centric framework, so on and so forth. So again, in the case studies we talked about, where we build a full end-to-end connected government model, we now try to enable citizens so that the citizens can interact with the government users directly via online portals. You have APIs where third-party enterprises can build government-related applications, providing them to the citizens. You then have the actual enterprise backend integrations where you basically get rid of the paper-based systems, do more integration and reduce times, thereby saving a lot of money and having a higher return on investment, so on and so forth. So that's the basic bit of connected business, and in this case, let's say a connected government. But more importantly, with the newer models and the newer domains coming in, like big data, analytics, cloud-based systems, so on and so forth, enabling these technologies and allowing further reach for governments to the citizens. So that's an important area of the modern connected business.
Yeah, but I think from my perspective, I would certainly echo absolutely everything you said there, Mifan. I think perhaps and another way to think about that is that if you as a company want to create new business models, you want to create new services for your customers who are increasingly demanding, what you need to do today is to bring together disparate data and information. So it's how you bring together these range of different data sources, and that's not just within the own walls of your enterprise, but also from much more broader sources outside the traditional walls of your organization. How do you bring in data from social media? How do you bring in all this range of data that's now available? And to bring that in and be able to use that effectively to provide these new services that your customers are demanding. Let's just see if there are any further questions from the audience. We have one question here, which is,
yes,
what do you mean?
To be...
Sorry,
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say there's one question here on the chat, which is, what do you mean by providing an API to consumers? How can the consumer use this API?
So let me answer that question. So let's say we are still talking about a connected government, and you've got certain government departments who expose services. So let's say you've got the taxation department, a licensing department, and an assessment department. Each of these departments expose their own set of services. You can then basically have a government level, let's say an enterprise service bus, and a government level API manager, which exposes these APIs in a managed way. So you track those APIs, you have security around those APIs, and you then have the ability to consume those APIs. What then happens is you can have third-party enterprises to build applications. So for example, let's say I'm a third-party enterprise. I want to build an application which allows users to easily check the status of their license, for their property license, for example. So I consume those APIs and build, let's say, a mobile application or a web application, and that would be used by end users. And they would basically consume the application, which in turn would consume the APIs. So exposing APIs allows the government to basically have an interactive business model and basically open it up for the enterprises to also get involved in that business model, and increases the digital outreach. So you've got better services out there.
Okay, excellent, thank you. Currently, I don't think we have any further questions, unless I'm mistaken. We'll give it a couple more minutes, see if any more questions come in.
So there's one question on the panel, basically asking about middleware. So can you explain middleware in detail? So let me attempt to answer that as well. So middleware basically is any system software that sits in between various systems or various applications. So for example, if you take a use case like eBay, you got the eBay front end, you basically have the eBay backends, the legacy systems, the PayPals, so on and so forth. And any system that sits in between, that does the transformation, that does centralized analytics, that does identity federation, so on and so forth, would basically be middleware. So the WSO2 platform is basically a middleware platform, which basically supports the various middleware use cases like integration, identity, API management, big data analytics, so on and so forth. So it consists of a number of lean components which can be used as building blocks to build an end solution.
I see we have one additional question which just came in as well, which is how can I use the API manager in the context of services exposed in the form API?
So let me respond to that again. So how can you use the API manager in the context of services exposed in the form API? So I'm assuming, again, here, this is basically talking about a particular type of API. So let's say if you're building digital forms, so if you're building a portal, you can basically interact with APIs. So I built my front end using some technology, let's say JSP or whatever technology. I expose the form submission as an API, and basically, so then my front end can be a simple JavaScript or anything quite simple as well. I don't have to have business logic embedded in there. Once I'm done, I would just call the API, submit to the API, and let the API handle all of the business logic. So I'm assuming that is the question there.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
So we've got one more question just about that. Is API management a subset of an enterprise service bus? What are the responsibilities of an API manager? So just a quick response to that. So there are different patterns. There's an API Facade pattern which recommends having API management at a separate layer, and all of the enterprise service bus functionalities at a separate layer. And let me explain that further. So for example, let's say you have backend systems which talk different protocols. You then have your front-end APIs, which is basically, let's say, a bunch of REST APIs. When consumers consume these APIs, you need to transform those APIs so that it can actually communicate with the backend system and do various other functionalities. In that case, you would bring in an enterprise service bus to do your message transformations, your message orchestrations, service chainings, multiple service calls, external service calls, so on and so forth. So all of that would be dedicated to the functionality of an enterprise service bus, which would do it quite well. And you can horizontally scale that layer if that layer is quite performance intensive. You then basically simply expose these services as APIs from the API management layer. The functionality of the API management layer would be quite specific. So you would publish those APIs, you would selectively publish APIs. These APIs would then be available in an index page, an API store, so that application developers can subscribe to these APIs. These APIs would have security associated with it. That means access tokens, auth tokens, your refresh tokens, user tokens, and application tokens, so on and so forth. You then need the ability to have SLAs and quality of service associated with these APIs. So that means basically having tier rules. I can say that certain enterprises have a bronze tier, so they only can access 10 API calls per second, whereas another enterprise has a platinum tier where they can access unlimited API calls per second. You might also need to do API analytics and monetization. So you push these API consuming information to an analytics platform so that you can monetize those APIs. So you can basically bill the enterprises at the end of the month on the usage of these APIs. So very specific functionality for an API management solution and specific functionality for an ESB solution. And an API facade pattern recommends that you handle these in separate systems.
And I see, Mifan, we have one further question, a bit more specifically about the WSO2 platform. Perhaps you can take that one as well.
Okay, so let me read out the question first. In a typical data warehouse solution, you pull information in from various source systems into a staging area, perform some calculation and transformation, and then present the data in a business access layer. Business intelligence can access this data. How would WSO2 middleware add advantage in this scenario? So we had business intelligence in the past. We are now frequently hearing about big data. So it is basically business intelligence, but with a larger amount of data and a variety of data, the volume of data, so on and so forth. So the WSO2 solution encompasses 4 different areas. Predictive analytics, so where you can do machine learning and basic algorithms for forecasting. In business intelligence, it was called forecasting. You then have real-time analytics, where analytics is done on the fly. So for example, let's say APIs are being consumed real-time in a financial industry. You want to basically figure out whether there are fraudulent transactions real-time and take action based on that. So that would be real-time analytics. You got the traditional batch analytics, where all of the information is pushed into a NoSQL storage, which is similar to a warehouse in the business intelligence scenario. You then apply your patterns, apply your analytics on top of that, and produce reports on top of that. And then, of course, you got interactive analytics, where you can actually query the various systems. So quite similar functionality to business intelligence. We are just dealing with a much larger data set and different challenges around that, and different ways of actually implementing this. In business intelligence, you push to a warehouse, you would build your OLAP cubes around it. You would then basically have your reports pointing to the OLAP cube so that you can do drill down, drill through, so on and so forth. In big data, for example, if you're using a Cassandra storage, you'd have a Cassandra ring. Your writes would be very fast. So that you can basically keep on pushing information at a very high volume. You would then have something like Hive scripts or Apache Spark or whatever technology to interact with the NoSQL storage, create summary tables out of that, and create reports out of that. But the bigger advantage, of course, is you can then start analyzing data on the fly using complex event processing, apply machine learning, so on and so forth. So quite a lot of similarities, but there are some differences as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mifan. And I believe that's actually all the questions we have at the moment. We'll just give it a few more seconds, see if any last questions come in. And I believe that's actually all we have for now. So with that, from Bellatrix's side at least, I would like to say many thanks to all our panelists, to Ruben, to Enzo, to Mifan for taking the time to participate, and of course everyone on the line today for taking the time out of your days to join us. If you have any follow-up questions, raised any thoughts or ideas amongst you, we'll be absolutely delighted to continue the conversation with you, and you can see here all our contact details, so please do feel free to reach out to us.